I'm mixing up what's called a sponge. Of course, in the 19th century, they weren't using dried yeast out of a jar the way we do. It was yeast that they would keep from one baking day to the next by saving a little bit of the dough from 1 week to the next. And it wasn't as fast acting as modern yeast. And so they would actually set the sponge, as they put it, the night before they were going to be baking, and mix up whatever liquid that was going to be in the bread with some of the flour that was going to be in the bread and the yeast, and just let it fester all night. Ours works pretty quickly. And then, so it's actually, the sponge is the consistency of a thick pancake batter. When we started working with these big dough tubs for making bread, this is a big bread tub. Actually, it's a small one. The shaker ones are much larger than this. But for the amount of bread that we make, this is sufficient. I've mixed up 2 bowls of bread sponge. Some of it is going to be used for bread, and some of it's going to be used for, well, we call it good cake. Actually, the recipe was in a shaker manuscript recipe book that I think she was just describing the cake. It wasn't really the name of the cake. She was just saying this is good cake. But that's what the recipe is titled, good cake. So what it is some of the bread sponge set aside, and then more sweetening and some fruit and some spices added to it. And so it's a yeast-risen cake, which is rather foreign to us nowadays, but it's really quite delightful, and it ends up with a lovely texture. And on baking day, which for the shakers was Saturdays, they, I assume, would fire both of the bake ovens. I'm assuming that the other oven that was once here on the other chimney system was the same size as the one we're firing now. And if both of them could bake 4 settings at one heating, they were baking their whole week's bread. And Saturday was the bread baking day. And probably other yeast-risen things came along using some of the bread sponge. Rusks were very common, which are sort of like little yeast-risen scones, and good cake or bread cake or whatever they would have called it. On the days when you weren't firing the oven, you didn't have pies or fresh breads or muffins or something like that, so they would do more steaming and boiling of things. Boiled puddings were much more common than baked pies in the early 19th century. So we'll be doing some steamed bread pudding and steamed brown bread to go along with our baked bread. It's time, I think, to feed the fire again. Yep. It's burning quite briskly, but it's beginning to get lower, so it's time to move it a little bit and feed it again. So this time it's right up against the wall up in front, because the wall tapers up to the doorway here. So I'm just going to push it right along the wall a little bit back, about the width of the fire, the current fire. Ooh, trying not to put the fire out. But this degree of briskness of the fire is what I want to keep going the whole time. Bake ovens were built on all different designs, but this one, with the flue being in the front of the oven and the chimney being at the back of the oven, this type of oven was referred to as a reverse squirrel tail oven. A squirrel tail oven had the flue opening at the back of the oven and the chimney in the front. And you can imagine it makes a little squirrel tail up over the top of the oven. It's hot. There are stories about stove ovens and how long you're supposed to be able to hold your hand in to know how hot it is. And I have no idea. I just put my hand in and if it hurts, it's hot enough. I think it's ready for the chickens. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Whoop. Later on, in true shaker style, we'll probably bake a couple of pies in there and maybe some cookies. But for now, it's roasting. And I think it's time to go move the fire again in the bake oven. That'll do it. Oh, and it's time now to mix the sponge into the flour in the dough tub. You can see it has doubled in bulk in the bowls, and it's now gotten yucca on the towels. We cover it to keep drafts and flies off of it. I'll stir it to get some of the air out of it. This needs a little bit more, a little whole wheat flour to thicken it before it'll be ready to go into the dough trough. Thank you, Heather. Just get. This is looking about right. This is good. Now I'm just going to pour this sponge into the flour that's in the tub, making a trough in it so it doesn't get stuck to the sides of the trough. And then gradually work the rest, enough flour into it that I can knead it. It obviously is too wet right now. I'm guessing that we'll make something like a dozen loaves of bread here, so you can tell that this is a fairly small trough for the shakers. They would be doing many dozen loaves of bread. The predecessor to the rubber spatula is the finger. Now I just work a little bit of the flour around the edges into the guck that's sitting in the middle. It's rather soupy still. In fact, I want to dump some more of the whole wheat on top. That's good. Well, this is looking pretty much ready for kneading, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Heather and go light the fires on the other side of the kitchen because we've got some boiling and some frying to happen. Thanks, Heather. Next, I'm going to light the fire under this set kettle, and this one is authentic in that it doesn't have water piped to it, so we have to bring buckets of water from the sinks to fill it up. We're going to be boiling some beets from the garden. Gladys, have you got a bucket of water? Looks like one more pot of water will do it. Yeah, that's going to be plenty. Once I put the beets in there, it'll be overflowing, I'm afraid. I build the fire in the same way as all the other fires, building a little house. And a kind of lattice work of kindling on top of that tinder. And then this thicker stove wood underneath there, on top of that. Ooh. Matches were called lucifers. All right.